Hi there, Kale. I am Dave Holowiski, and I'm going to answer your question, what are things that you have to consider when buying a laptop? And first thing is, welcome to Mahalo. I see this is the second question you've answered, so I hope you enjoy this answer. I buy a lot of laptops. Some might say it's almost an addiction. So I can tell you that the things you need to consider when you're buying a laptop have changed dramatically in the last couple of years. So one of the things I would say not to consider when you're buying a laptop is speed, because if you buy a reasonably modern laptop, it's fast enough. The other things not to consider quite as much are RAM, because as long as you have 2 gigabytes plus, unless you have some very specific needs, you've got enough RAM. And unless you go really cheap, you're not going to find a laptop with less RAM than that. The other thing is hard drive space, and again, pretty much the minimum in hard drives nowadays is 160 gigabytes, and unless that's going to be your primary computer, and even a lot of times then, that is a ton of hard drive space. So those used to be the things that were the most important when buying a laptop, was speed, RAM, and hard drive space, but not so much now. As long as you're buying a laptop that's about $400 plus, you're not going to have a problem. Some of the things you do want to consider, and so this is kind of an older laptop. Just double check and make sure it has built-in Wi-Fi. I would say almost every single one does. But also make sure it has Bluetooth. Some do and some don't, but that's a feature that we're all going to need relatively soon. So definitely do that. This is a pretty old, retired laptop, but it's from Dell, and although they're probably $150 more expensive than from other places, they make pretty good laptops. So the next thing is to consider size. So here we've got a netbook with a 10-inch screen and a netbook with an 8-inch screen. And the screen is nice, and I'm just going to open them up here, but what makes a huge difference is this one has a keyboard that I absolutely cannot type on. So when I use this netbook, and I have 5 of them, so it's a pretty good netbook, but when I use them, I have to plug in an external keyboard. There's no way I can use this keyboard. However, this one, when I use it, this keyboard they say is 92% the size of a real keyboard, and when I use this one, I'm able to type with almost no problem. There's a couple keys like the backslash and shift that I have a little bit of trouble hitting. So that's a thing to consider, is definitely the size. Now if you go too big, and I don't have an example here with me, those were an 8-inch and a 10-inch screen. If you go on the other side to a 17-inch screen, consider portability, because a 17-inch screen makes for a gigantic laptop, and it's pretty darn hard to carry around with you. If it's essentially a desktop replacement, maybe you don't care. But if you need a big screen, I would get a laptop with a smaller screen and just buy a bigger monitor to use on your desktop. Now the next one is, of course, the MacBook Pro. And this is where you need to consider, when you're buying a laptop, what is overkill. I bought this MacBook Pro a couple of years ago because I figured that I was going to be editing lots of video on it. And it was pretty good for Final Cut Pro, but honestly, if you're doing a lot of video editing, you need a desktop. So I have an iMac or even a Mac Pro, or on the PC side, something with 4 or 8 cores is pretty nice. Don't expect to be doing really heavy-duty things on it. So that's when I get into the other thing I wanted to mention. If you're planning on gaming on this laptop, and I don't mean like web, Farmville, that kind of stuff, I mean serious hardcore gaming, disregard everything I just said. What you need to do is you need to go find out which games you're going to play on the laptop, and you need to go into the forums for that game and find out what kind of laptops they're getting, because you need 3D graphics cards, which most laptops don't have, and you'll need to buy a specific laptop, honestly, for a specific game, otherwise you're not going to be happy. So just to recap, things to consider when you're buying a laptop are the size. I would say 15 inches is pretty good. You don't want to go too big, you don't want to go too small. So with size goes the weight and the portability. The other thing is I would try to get Bluetooth. You can get little add-on things, but they're not very nice. The things not to consider are the speed, the memory, and the hard drive space. That being said, make sure that you go a certain baseline. Like your speed should be at least 2 gigahertz, probably dual core with 2 gigs of RAM minimum and 160 gig hard drive minimum. I would also make sure you have Windows 7. Most of the laptops there nowadays have that. And that's about it. If you have any more questions, just reply to my answer. Thanks.